Greetings, wrestling fans. This is Jim Fannin, the guy you love to hate, or maybe you just hated my guts, period. I have the pleasure of leading you into the MidsouthMemories podcast. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals making the statements, and they do not necessarily reflect those of Nick Maniwa, Mike Ruff, or the BNMVS Podcast Network. This podcast is intended for mature audiences only. The IWA Mid-South shows covered on this podcast contained adult themes. Violence for the sake of violence. Bloodshed for the sake of bloodshed. Explicit language. We're on these shows because if you ain't hardcore, you ain't shit. So that just leaves one thing left to say. Nick Maniwa, start the podcast.
Guys, gals, non-binary pals, we in here, Pro Wrestling's BFF Nick Maniwa, for another episode of Mid-South Memories with my co-host, my very good friend, Mike Ruff of RuffFigures.com. Mike, how you doing, pal?
Nick, we're doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Today we have the IWA Mid-South show Locked, which happened in May 3rd of 2002 at the Knights of Columbus Hall in Indianapolis, Indiana. Before you watch this show for this podcast, had you ever seen this show before?
I have not seen this one. This one's going back. We're turning back the clock 2002. I think it's one of our favorite eras of IWA Mid-South, and the few episodes that we've done in this era have been, I think, among our best thus far. So we're taking it back 2002. Hadn't seen it before. Right around the time that I started my interest in IWA Mid-South was probably 2002, 2003, so it's right before I really got into it. But I think it's, one of the peak eras that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at this point, I believe we had the Clarksville building, the one behind the Colgate clock in Clarksville, or if not, we were about to get the Clarksville building. So we were kind of doing spot shows. We talked about it for the Morris Mayhem show, how we didn't have a definite building, so we were, running shows at the Shriners Club in Clarksville. We were running shows at the Knights of Columbus in Indianapolis. We were going up to Dayton and running shows. We were trying just to find a building that allowed wrestling to allow us to run wrestling shows. I believe
the Knights of Columbus is still used to run wrestling, isn't it? I've heard that recently, I feel.
Yeah, I don't know if they allow wrestling in it still, but there are some places, like I believe Dreamwave Wrestling runs in a Knights of Columbus, where they have shows in Illinois, and I'm not sure if the Indianapolis one allows wrestling. Imagine that. But there are still wrestling promotions that wrestle at Knights of Columbus halls. It's kind of a worldwide, not a worldwide, a United States wide thing. There's one in every city if you got enough people that are members of said hall. This was in Indianapolis. I believe Insanity Pro Wrestling ran shows at this Knights of Columbus hall. I would go on later in like 2010 when me and Reed Bentley became friends to start going to Insanity Pro Wrestling shows that they run at the Salvation Army Gym in Fountain Square in Indianapolis, which also no longer allows pro wrestling after pro wrestling stuff happened. Like I said, this was just a little spot show to keep the lights on, keep people interest in IWA up as we search for or put the finishing touches on the Clarksville building. The Clarksville building is where that Blood Feast show was that we did for the first episode. But it is May 3rd, 2002. At the time, the current WWE champion is Hulk Hogan, having won it at Backlash 2002 on 4/21/02. He'd lose it to The Undertaker on May 19th. The current tag team champions are Billy and Chuck, who I was a big fan of Billy and Chuck back in the day. What say you, Mike?
Yeah, I liked Billy and Chuck. I always liked Billy Gunn in any role he had.
Right.
And even now, 60-something years old, isn't he?
Right, yeah, and in the best shape of his career, possibly.
Right, yeah. Still doing great, and it seems like, I mean, he's one of those guys that's just good to have in the business.
Totally. I agree with that. The current hardcore champion is Shawn Stasiak. And then it's Crash Holly. And then it's Steven Richards. Because they had a four-way, and then, hardcore rules. Steven Richards would leave that night as the hardcore champion and then lose it immediately the next day to Booker T.
God bless. Is that Stasiak's only, other than the tag team title run, his only singles championship?
It might well be. I don't know. My Shawn Stasiak knowledge is limited, to say the very least. He did at one time follow me on Twitter when he started his Twitter, and he's like a doctor now.
Yeah.
So shout outs to Shawn Stasiak. The current Intercontinental Champion is Eddie Guerrero, who won that 2 days after his last IWA appearance in April of 2002. He won it on 4/21, and he wrestled for us on 4/19 in Dayton, Ohio, against CM Punk and Colt Cabana. I believe that match is up on YouTube for free on Cabana's YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. The number one movie in the world is Spider-Man, which brought in, at the end of its run, $403.7 million. Now, I've definitely seen this Spider-Man movie. What say you, Mike?
Yeah, it is a favorite in the Ruff household. My kids love that version. We watched it for, every day for like 2 or 3 months. So yeah, I'm very familiar. I love Tobey Maguire.
Right. Yeah, definitely a fun one. I definitely don't miss those days of continuously watching stuff. I believe the last one we had was Turning Red. A cute movie. It's a great movie. I enjoy it. But, the 3rd, the 6th, the 7th, the 20th, the 30th time, gets a little grinding, where you can just put it out of your brain. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know exactly what the kids' reaction is going to be.
Yep.
You know they're going to start singing the boy band songs. You know exactly what's going to go on. You can do your, time your day out to it perfectly.
That's right. Yeah, and shout out to Bonesaw.
Bonesaw!
From the
what's he
say
in the movie? He's like, for 3 minutes you're mine, or something like that. Yeah.
As we all do.
My good friend Chris Zellner and Rob Naylor just released a Macho Man retrospective on the Between the Sheets podcast feed. So definitely check that out. They're just basically talking about his whole career in short form and going over, I believe I still have a little bit left of it, but I think it's like a 2.5, 3 hour podcast. Super fun times. Just reminiscing about the run of Macho Man, The Sound of Madness, and I believe it's a Exile on Bad Street on the Between the Sheets podcast feed. So this is a Friday night in Indianapolis, Indiana. The commentators for the show are Chris Hero, Mark Wolf, Dave Prazak, CM Punk, Nate Webb, and Jim Fannin. I believe it is Chris Hero and Mark Wolf to start the show.
Surprisingly good team on commentary, too. I enjoyed Mark Wolf on commentary. Never heard that before, so it was cool to hear him. I thought he, kept the show alive.
Yeah, I think Mark was, I think they mentioned it later in the show, he was nursing a back injury. So he was on commentary. Mark, a smart dude, but he also had a dry sense of humor and would, throw in his comments and make comments and throw people off. He would always, on high anxiety show days, he would always be the one that would mess with Ian and, get fired and then rehired and then fired again and rehired, because it would always be, not today, Mark, not today. And it would just, just the stupidest stuff. Him and Mitch Page both, would be fired and rehired and, told to, get out and whatever, just from, seeing that Ian is stressed beyond belief and just adding to said stress on a show day. And you would see the twinkle in Mark's eye as Ian made a comment, and then Mark had a perfect rebuttal to it. And then he would go over to Ian and say, hey, what if we, whatever it may be. And, not today, Mark. But today we have Mark Wolf on commentary, and the first match is Jayden Draigo versus Michael Todd Stratton, Todd Morton, whatever you want to call him. I think we talked about it off air. At some point, Todd Morton wanted to get rid of his fake wrestling name and go by his government name, Michael Todd Stratton. It didn't really stick because the graphic to start the match says Todd Morton. People call him Todd Morton during the match on commentary. So,
Hero tried to get it over a few times.
He tried.
And it didn't.
He tried his damnedest. Jayden Draigo is in his best tribal tattoo dragon shirt and leather pants.
If this is not 2002 wrestling gear I've ever seen. That's what I wore. That basically is what I wore for my middle school graduation in May of 2002.
Right. I was going to say, if there's not a perfect, stamp of the time period, then Jayden Draigo's gear at this point. Jayden Draigo was trained by Shawn Michaels.
I heard that on commentary, and that shocked me.
At the Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy. He's from the Omaha, Nebraska area. He started wrestling in November of 1999 and was in IWA Midsouth by April of 2000. He had quite a bit of appearances in 2000 and then came back a little bit in 2002. And when he would come back in 2002, he would usually come for a weekend and, stay with Hero or stay with Ian or do something like that. That's what he did here. This is the first night of a double shot in Dayton, Ohio. Maybe we'll get to that show eventually, but here tonight he is in singles action. A kind of a weird thing. No ring introductions are shown.
Nothing.
And I was really confused by that. I was like, why wouldn't they show that? I don't know if that was a time cutting, thing or what, but
it was the same for a lot of the entrances. Like, you get 3 seconds of Hero coming through a door, and then it cuts, and then someone else coming through a door, and it cuts. And
right.
I guess maybe to keep it onto one tape.
Yeah, probably. There's a questionable bell ringing where Todd goes, "Was that the bell?" I don't know. A basic match. Todd does the Chris Candido sunset flip. I feel like this match would have been perfect after intermission.
Yep.
As the opener, they went about 15 minutes. They definitely could have shaved some time here. And for as much as the crowd got into it, later on in the match, I think after intermission would have been the perfect spot for this. What say you, Mike?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think Todd in the opener, while it gets the crowd going, I think there's a better place for that. It's a typical Todd Morton match. We've covered a few of these already. The fans are super into it. He's doing his normal Memphis shit. He hits an arm drag and he's like, "Yeah, textbook, baby, Memphis style." And he's like running his mouth the whole time. It's just, it's classic. He gets, I don't know if it's on the mic, but he's like, if any of you guys in the crowd are calling me this name, that name, I will leave, or anything else that's vulgar, I will leave. So immediately, what does everyone do in the crowd? Starts a Europeanist chant, it's fun. It's typical Todd Morton stuff, and he gets the crowd going, and I think that's why it was probably in the opener, just to get everybody like, all right, here we go, boom.
Right, definitely.
He does stupid shit too, like the hair, right? Oh, he's pulling my hair,
right?
No hair. And then he pins Jayden and has his feet up on the ropes, and he's like, oh, the ropes got in the way.
Right.
It's just classic, shenanigans of a dirty dick heel, and he does it as well as anyone could.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree totally. Like I said, just needed about 5 minutes shaved off, and that he does the pile driver, and then he's lifting him up, and he's yep, just needed some time shaved
You
for that
mentioned
one.
the Candido sunset flip spot with the pants down.
Yep.
And he does it. The pants are down. He's running around a little bit. There's a point where I think he kind of bends over for either to execute a move, and of course that's when he realizes that his pants are down. Is when he bends over and feels that cool air, and as does the fans. It's a little shocking. But that's the point where he realized that his pants are down. He has to do something about it. So it's typical stuff. And I know you love Candido. I love Candido. It brings me back to that guy. And it's just classic funny douche heel kind of stuff.
Right. Just recently, a couple days ago or yesterday, Conrad and Tony Schiavone did the 8-man tag that Candido was in. On their podcast, and they watched it, and so if you have any desire to listen about Tony Schiavone and Conrad talk about a match from 2004 with Chris Candido and funniness, the match is on YouTube. You can watch it along with them as they comment over it, so definitely check that out. One of the owners of NWA No Limits, who we ran shows with in 2004, 2005, Doug Ritter was the one that requested it as a Patreon member, so that's why it got picked. So, if you feel like some Chris Candido in your life, check out the most recent What Happened When podcast. Today's date is May 9th, 2024, if you're listening to this in the very, very far future. So, speaking of future,
if you feel like you don't need more Chris Candido in your life, you're wrong. You need to go check
absolutely.
it out.
You are wrong. I need as much Chris Candido as possible.
As we all do. Keep that man's legacy alive. He did amazing things, and he still doesn't get the appreciation that he deserves.
Absolutely. Coming up next, we have Lacey versus Rain. This was during Prazak's He-Man Woman Hater days, so he's just burying them on commentary. He'd start Shimmer in November of 2005 after doing Volcano Girls for IWA Mid-South and was put in charge of the IWA Mid-South Women's Division, I believe in 04, late 03, early 04, and then would go on until he left IWA Mid-South. Lacey and Rain were basically married to each other on the scene. They were both from Minnesota. Not a lot of women's wrestlers in Minnesota, so they wrestled each other wherever they went. They were a combo package, essentially. So there is probably 800 Lacey and Rain matches, and they definitely had 5, 6, 7, 8 in IWA Mid-South, if I'm not mistaken. This is a fine match, and then Prazak hits the ring with the microphone, and he's just like burying them, and they make him look like a fool, which then he calls out Mitch and Roland to attack. Bikini Girl gets in, and Mitch kills her with a choke slam. Lacey gets a Death Valley driver. Rain gets like a double team burning hammer, and then they stack the girls on top of each other, and Prazak pins them in. Hero and Cash run them off. As Hero goes after Roland, he almost like falls out of the ring but catches himself. I was so impressed by that. What do you think about this segment?
I think the highlight of this segment was Prazak all over the place. And if you don't have the context of Dave Prazak and his interest in wrestling and what he would do later on with Shimmer, you would probably feel very different about his performance in this segment.
Yep.
There are some things that I will not repeat.
It is a piece of its time.
It is a piece of its time. Thank you, Jim Fannin, for the disclaimer in the beginning also.
Right.
Lacey and Rain, like you said, married together. You said that, there weren't many women's wrestlers out of Minnesota. There weren't many women's wrestlers at all on the scene at this point in time, really. I mean, there was a few, but it's nowhere near what it is now, where you have at least one women's match on every indie show. They would come out for like a show like this and be put against each other because there was literally no one else. Everyone else was either a valet or, not a proficient wrestler. And these two, I think, were pioneers definitely in getting not only Shimmer kind of on the map, but just like eyes on women's wrestling in general. So along with the support of Prazak later on, I think the two of them were among the first to really kind of push women's wrestling to be like a serious thing again.
Yeah, definitely.
After the Attitude Era.
Yeah, they were not doing the bra and panties matches, or they were just coming to shows, putting on great wrestling matches, and they were, like we said, married to each other. Not a ton of lady wrestlers around, and thankfully that would change. 3 years later with the birth of Shimmer and the medical by IWA management afterwards.
Oh man,
it's like what is happening here? They put Bikini Girl on a table to stretcher her out. I like. Obviously, it's another sign of the times where it's like people don't know what's going on, but it's just like I don't know how to explain it. Like,
the table was funny.
Yeah, it was just like if someone was really hurt, I don't know if Ian Rotten's the one in charge to be head of medical, but I digress.
Could have been worse. I don't know that it could have, but it could have been.
Right.
I mean, they roll her over, right? She just got destroyed. They roll her over, put on her table, and kind of shimmy her out of there.
Right, yeah. It was like, well, she's dead in the middle of the ring. I don't know how we're going to get her up. And like, if we did have, at one point we did have a few stretchers, like a backboard thing or whatever they call those things.
Yeah.
So like, even if we had that, we still would have had to done the same thing with a stretcher and you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's the table. It's the image of the table. Like someone just grabs a table. They're like, fuck it, close enough. It's a flat object.
Right. The next match, Shirley Doe versus Corporal Robinson. Shirley Doe was a Pittsburgh guy that was friends with Hero and CM Punk. He was a very solid wrestler with a satanic-like gimmick, heavy strikes, still semi-active to this day. Shout out to Derek Dillinger. He and Lee Moriarty got to sit under the learning tree of Shirley Doe for years. He actually tagged with Shirley Doe a few years back. Shirley Doe would have appearances for the Fighting Ultimate Crazy Kings, which if you can hear the words in that, the promotion letters would be FUCK, the fuck promotion. DDT in Japan. He was a regular for IWC and PWX in Pittsburgh, and then he did a one-off appearance for Chikara in the Tag World Grand Prix. Punk is actively putting over Shirley Doe in this match. You can tell that this is his friend, and he's on commentary to put over his friend. And at the beginning of the match, he is beating the shit out of Corporal Robinson. He is hitting him so hard with forearms, so hard with European uppercuts, and then he picks him up for a muscle buster and drops him or loses his footing or whatever happens, and then right there the fans turn on him. And then it's the corpse show. He kills him with a brain buster and a pile driver immediately afterwards. Doe tries like a fireman's carry something or other, and he dropped him. I don't know if Corp sandbagged or if they just didn't have the timing right or what the issue was, but I think at that point it was like, oh, this guy sucks, because he dropped him or whatever. And unfortunately, he would never come back to IWA after this weekend. Mike, what'd you think about this show? Or this match, rather?
I don't think it was a bad match. It was a physical match. I think it was obvious that they were not destined for a love affair early on when, some of those forearms and elbows and, uppercuts were being thrown. Corp didn't like it. You could tell that.
Right.
There was a point in the match where I think Shirley Doe's climbing to the top rope and Corp just like uppercuts him right in the junk. For lack of a better term, and it wasn't a pro wrestling like kind of low blow. It was like a punch to the dick. So that was interesting. in the beginning of the match, Corp, he hits arm drag, drop kick, throws a plancha over the top, and it's just like you can kind of see glimmers of Corp not needing to do the hardcore stuff. Like maybe he could have been something without it and could have put on a decent match without it. So that was kind of cool to see. Something you don't see every day. But yeah, it was a different Corp match. It was a non-hardcore match. I don't think they had great chemistry. I have no inside knowledge, but I don't think they particularly cared for each other, and it may have been just, bad chemistry or whatever, but it didn't really work. It didn't have much flow.
Yeah, I think at this point, later on in IWA, we called Shane Mercer the gatekeeper because we put anybody new in there with Shane Mercer, and I think at this point, Corp and, the next day, Shirley Doe draws Necro on that Dayton show. Both Corp and Necro were kind of like, let's see how tough this guy is, gatekeeper type situation. And I think had, Shirley Doe been in there with someone like Tarek the Great or CM Punk or Hero or, even Jayden Draigo or whoever, it would have flowed a little bit more than him and Corp.
It definitely seemed like, he was put on the show as a favorite of someone, and he was not well liked even before the first show. And I mean, they put him in there with Corp and with Necro day 1 and day 2. That it's not a nice thing to do.
I think it was just a test. I don't know if Shirley Doe was doing the hardcore stuff at this time, but he would, have matches with like Balls Mahoney and do some hardcore stuff in the Pittsburgh area. So I don't know if this is like, hey, let's test you out. You're at IWA Mid-South, the hardcore company or one of the hardcore companies. Let's see what you got, kid. And,
we've talked about that before with Ian. Ian puts, the younger, maybe not younger inexperienced, but the unknown in there with a guy who's established. And the way that he comes out of that will decide his future there, probably. If he shines in this match with Corp, maybe he's there for more than just the weekend.
Right, for sure.
He didn't shine, but I don't think it was anything that he did badly. You know what I mean? There was that one kind of awkwardness, but I don't think he got a fair shake in that match. And like you said, the fans kind of turned on him early.
And I don't know the backstory. Maybe he had these matches and then got his payoff and was like, oh, this ain't worth it. I'm never coming back. So I don't know why he didn't come back to IWA Mid-South, but sadly he did not come back to IWA. The match after this is a 30-minute Iron Man match. Ice Pick Vic Capri against Ace Steel for the IWA Mid-South light heavyweight title. There is no title, if I'm not mistaken, for the light heavyweight title.
Right.
This was a big feud in IWA Mid-South. They had 9 matches in IWA from March 1st, 02 to January 25th, 03. They had 2 out of 3 falls matches. They had this Iron Man match. They had 3-ways with CM Punk involved. A great wrestling match. They're trying to fill time. I think it would have been better as a 15-minute or 20-minute Iron Man match. There is a botched tope from Ace Steel, which you don't see a lot. Ace Steel botching anything. And then he eats a sliced bread on the floor. Ace wins the match 4-3 with an IWA chant after. What'd you think of this one, Mike?
Yeah, I thought it was a good match. Like you said, they've had quite a few in the past, and that's something that Jim Fannin kind of goes on about on commentary is the history of this kind of feud and how essentially Vic Capri has not necessarily been dominant, but he's had the advantage throughout most of the feud. And Fannin also kind of talks about the strategy of an Iron Man match, which was cool. Like essentially saving your body for the future falls and not kind of blowing your load in the first fall. So like if you get put in the submission hold, do you ride it out or do you tap early and live to fight for the next fall? Which is, a take that I don't think commentators, especially in like the major leagues, we'll call it, of wrestling, do. They don't really pull back I don't want to say pull back the curtain, but they don't talk about the strategy of a wrestling
The
match.
psychology of it type.
Right. And that's important in an Iron Man match because that's what it's about. You're not fighting for one fall, you're fighting for multiple falls. So do you save yourself or do you go down, a fall early? So I like the commentary team of Fannin, and I think Dave Prazak was also on the call, who, in my notes I made a little comment about Dave going on kind of a mini monologue about how Midwest wrestlers are not held in the same regard as the East Coast, and especially, in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, you're the historian here, but the East Coast indie scene was what everything was about, right? It was like the Reckless Youth and the guys of that nature. Like, it was only the East Coast. And I think Dave, I don't want to say had a chip on his shoulder because I don't know that to be true, but he goes to bat for the Midwest wrestlers of that era, the Ace Steels, the Vic Capris, the CM Punks, the guys that bust their ass for years and didn't get the same respect that lesser caliber wrestlers got on the East Coast.
Right, I agree with that. And I don't think you're wrong with saying it was a chip on his shoulder because I think everyone in the Midwest had that chip on their shoulder. I mean, there was, a car every single week, twice a week coming down from Chicago. Punk, Cabana, Chucky Smooth, Prazak. Ace Steel would jump in the car, to wrestle in Charlestown, Indiana in front of 50 to 70 to 100, 150 people, whatever it may be. And it wasn't until the birth of Ring of Honor that the Midwest really started to get some love. I don't think I'm wrong in saying this or being too forward here, but I know Gabe and promotions later on would watch IWA tapes and be like, okay, who's ready to make that next step, that jump? And, at first it was Punk and Cabana and Ace Steel, and then later on it was Jimmy Jacobs and Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin, and then it was Delirious and Matt Sydal, and, they always come in pairs or they come in a carload or whatever it may be, but, they would do their time, they would get their reps in at IWA Mid-South, and then they would go on to the bigger paydays, which is kind of what we always, I guess, did at IWA was, I've said it multiple times on this podcast already, you're not going to make a ton of money here. You might not break even, but you'll have, dope matches. You'll get reps, and, those reps set you up for that later on career, whether it be Ring of Honor or Impact or wherever you may go after you leave IWA Mid-South. And, I feel like Dave was echoing a lot of what the Midwest talent was saying. Not just Hero, Punk, and Cabana, or Punk, Cabana, and Ace Steel, but Hero involved, and even the deathmatch guys. CZW got the Big Japan deal, and they got all this, and they got all this press, and the IWA guys, Mitch and Corp, are killing each other on Wednesday, and they coming back on Saturday and doing 100 light tubes, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, when, we're not getting any coverage on the websites or magazines or anything like that. And, people on the East Coast are. So I feel like a lot of people definitely in IWA Mid-South and in IWA Mid-South history, had that chip on their shoulder until they finally, got their comeuppance and got their, pat on the back, I guess you would say, instead of comeuppance, their pat on the back in wrestling after their time spent.
No, I was just gonna say, you brought up Ring of Honor and Gabe's kind of interest in kind of moving out west from the East Coast where they kind of started, and I think a lot of that is true because some of their best shows were those Dayton shots where they came further west than the typical area. And I think they gave a lot of respect to those shows, and they put on great shows there, and they put big names on those shows to kind of get the area over a little more than just the Phillies, the New Jerseys, and stuff like that. So definitely, I think that Gabe, while I think he's considered an East Coast guy, he had respect for the others, and it was never like, maybe it was, I don't know, but it didn't feel like a divisive thing, like, oh, we're East Coast company, we're not going to book you Midwest guys. Because I feel like he was very much open to that. And that's where they had some of those, I think they called them do or die shows, where it was like a tryout deal. And they brought in like Delirious, Seidel, some of those guys and gave them a chance to see what the reaction was of their typical crowd. And I think that was huge for getting, some of those guys over. And, me kind of being young in the interest in indie wrestling at the time, always saw these guys as IWA guys. So like when Delirious and Seidel came over to ROH and had their, their tryout, I think initially first, it was kind of like, okay, they're giving some interest into the IWA guys, but it wasn't just that. It was the whole territory of the Midwest and, not just IWA, but that's where kind of the most publicity was had is in IWA.
Right, definitely. Yeah, and, Gabe coming from ECW, coming from, being under Paul Heyman's learning tree, Paul Heyman didn't just pick guys in the Northeast or whatever it may be. He was flying guys from Canada, flying guys from Mexico or whatever. So Gabe definitely learned a little bit from his mentor when it comes to, I guess, getting talent together and putting on shows.
And the most successful guys and the most successful companies do that. You look at Gabe and ROH, you look at Ian brought in whoever was going to be, maybe he wouldn't fly people out, but whoever was willing to come out, he would book. You look at even a guy like Brett Lauderdale and GCW, and no matter where they go, they're interested in that local talent. And I think that's huge for the success of their company. They're not, they're booking the Jimmy Lloyds, the Moss's, all the staples at every show, but they're also giving respect to the local area. Like they come out to LA and they book Lil Cholo on a show,
right.
They go to, you name it, Jersey somewhere and they book Grim Reaper, so they have the most successful ones have respect for not just their home base and their home team and, their home region, but they go and they move out and they bring in talent from all over the place, and those are the ones that are the most successful, I think.
Yeah, I agree. 110%.
To button up this match, like you said, could have gone shorter, back and forth for most of it. There's some interesting holds put on throughout, like, kind of the middle of the match, like a dragon sleeper that wasn't completely locked in. Ace Steel puts Vic in a camel clutch, and of course we get Dave Prazak's best Iron Sheik impression, as any respected commentator would probably do. Maybe not yourself, Nick, but at least, yeah, we got a cool Iron Sheik impression. The ending was interesting. There was like a top rope elbow, I think Ace hit to tie it up 2-2 with 10 minutes to go. Ace hit a springboard DDT for a 3 count with 5 minutes to go, and then it got closer to the end. Vic hits like a German suplex at the end and gets a 3 count out of it, although I'm not sure I don't know that was the right call. I would have liked to review that. But yeah, and then Ace, to finish off the match, just hits a small package with seconds left, and I think gets the win with that. It seemed, I hate to say it, but it seemed choreographed at the end with the timing. I get how hard that is to plan out, but it just kind of stalled for so long in the middle, and the quality of the hold in the middle of the match was not the quality of the hold at the end of the match. We'll leave it at that.
Right.
Not a bad match. It's hard to do that 30-minute Iron Man situation and have it, reflect a compelling story and hit the second mark and the 5-minute mark and all that good stuff. So no lack of respect for either of these guys. They have done better, I think. They could have done better with a different time allocation.
Right, because if you look at the show the next day, there's a 2 out of 3 falls match and an Iron Man match, and whoever had it on the first night, they had the other stipulation on the next night. And we kind of talked about that with IWA Mid-South when there was a double shot like this for undercard matches. It'd be like, oh, so-and-so won last night, and then Ian would just be like, okay, switch it, put the other guy over tonight. So I feel like that's what happened kind of here, because the next night there's a 30-minute Iron Man match in Dayton with, I think it's Punk and Cabana, if I'm not mistaken.
How do you feel about Ian doing that because he liked the matchup, or Ian doing that because he thought the fans would be into it?
I think, if you put Punk and Cabana or Vic and Ace in there, it's going to be a great match. But I feel like it's somewhat lazy too, of just be like, okay, well, we'll just switch the steps, or we'll just put the other guy over, or, like I said before, Ian's at his best when he has a set building and he knows what's going on. So during this period, when it's spot shows and 1 weekend a month or 2 weekends a month until we find that Clarksville building, I think, Ian kind of just rested on his laurels and just did whatever just to put on a match. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I guess that's part of it too. Is like back in the day. I mean, it's different now, right? We're 22 years in the future, and everybody sees everything. But
right.
In 2002, the same crowd that's at the indie show is probably not at the Dayton show, and to put on the same guys, different match, but the same, you know what you're getting, right? It's the same caliber of match if it's the same guys. So you want the different crowds to see that same matchup, and it goes back to guys like Seidel and Delirious. They wrestled each other everywhere, and it's because it was a good match and they came together. It was a package deal, and the same folks that saw that match on a Friday didn't see it on a Saturday. So if you can get both crowds to see that great match between those two guys that have a great amount of chemistry, I think that's probably a lot of the thinking also. And like you said, it's probably also easy.
Right. Yeah, you just got to also think about the tape traders and the tape viewers that are getting both of these tapes and they're like, hey, what the hell?
Same damn thing, different order. That's a great segue, Nick, into match number 5, Puppet versus Tio.
Yes, not the same damn thing. A totally different thing than anything else on the show. I want to give proper respects to Puppet, who passed away a few years ago. So pour some out for Puppet, the Psycho Dwarf. A great dude, a great guy. Always cared about getting his shit over, but getting everyone else over in the process, and taking care of other little people performers and making sure they get taken care of, and was always an upstanding individual. They had a match at King of the Deathmatch 2000, and I don't know if they were just in the area or they had a date open or whatever, or Nate Webb pushed for it because Nate Webb would help out at their shows and referee and MC it. But they are here for this show. We would use them again in 2007 for a high school show featuring the Honky Tonk Man and Demolition Axe. That is a true story. Look it up.
That sounds like a big time wrestling show.
Right? Doesn't it? Tony Casina's on it. I mean, it is a spectacle to say the very least.
That's what you do, though.
Yeah.
I mean, and Mark Wolf said it best on commentary. He said, where else are you going to see a women's match and a midget match on the same card? And I used the midget match in quotes.
Right.
It shows the depth that Ian booked at. Like, at the time, it's different now again. Like, how many times can I say that in this podcast? But back in the day in 2002, there weren't many women's matches, and there were even fewer good ones. So to have that on the same card as a midget match, as the same card with an Iron Man match,
right?
The same card as a hardcore, we've checked all boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. IWA Mid-South is trail mix for a wrestling fans, adventure in pro wrestling, because you get a little bit of everything. Puppet comes out, he's cutting a promo, he's talking shit, and Tio jumps him during his promo, so he can't even get his whole spiel out. Every lady wants to fuck a midget, and we say midget because that's what they call themselves. We're not saying it derogatory. They were the bloody midgets at the time. That's what they called themselves. TO stands for totally outrageous, if I'm not mistaken.
Outrageous?
Totally outrageous or totally outstanding, and then you just put it all together for TO.
Is he related to Paul E. Dangerously or E. Smooth?
Right. And like I said, we used them again in 2007. It was Puppet against TO at that high school. They're doing some great, and like we mentioned for the girls matches, or the women's matches. When you see a midget match on a show in the 90s or the early 2000s, you're thinking of biting the ref's ass. They're doing, duck, duck, goose or whatever the fuck. Tio and Puppet are busting their ass. They're doing stuff off the top rope. They're hitting each other hard. They're busting out tacks. They're using chairs.
And let's put that into context too, Nick. When you're 3-4 feet tall, the top rope is a lot taller than if you're 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
The missed swanton into tack hurts a lot more as a little person than it does for an average sized person that's hitting that same maneuver. So, endless respect to both of these guys. And like you said, Puppet throughout his career was the counter to the babyface, right? Like, he said all the dirty things. He was not terribly attractive. His style was grungy. It was just like he's the perfect counter to the babyface little person in a digit match.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. He at one point he throws Tio through the chairs, and we can see the second row and third row chairs. And I believe we used to bust those chairs from like whatever storage unit we had, because those are the infamous extra support bar green chairs that were deadly in IWA history. So I don't know if we ran shows at the Knights of Columbus and, somebody saw all the throws into the chairs or whatever, and they're like, you gotta bring your own chairs or whatever. But I'm almost positive we used to take the chairs up there for the shows. The finish of the match comes with a cranium crusher. It is a TKO on a open chair for Puppet to win the match. And then after the match, Puppet gets to get very vulgar and, talk some shit to the crowd. Yeah, just a super fun match, I think. Perfect in what it was. Didn't need anything extra. Just a fun little exhibition match for the Bloody Midgets.
A fun little match.
I wasn't trying to pun that, but
it was funny. It's okay. We got references to the short arm clothesline all throughout the match too. So
right. Yeah. Nate Webb is doing his best too, and Nate Webb and Mark Wolf are just hilarious on commentary there.
They had a whole back and forth about midget blood, and Nate was like, "Yeah, I don't want to get the midget blood on me because then I'll get the midget disease." It was terrible, but it was so funny.
Speaking of Nate Webb, he's in the next match. I want to say that we took an intermission after the midget match to clean up the tags and whatnot. So Nate Webb's not jumping straight from commentary, running in the back, and then coming out for his match. The next match, a tables match. Spider Nate Webb, taking on the Necro Butcher. When I think of the Necro Butcher, this is the look I see in my head.
Yep.
It is the choose. Yep. The choose death shirt, the crazy hair, the jeans, the tucked boots. That's what I see. The quiet riot, even for his entrance music.
That's definitely not only the peak, but that's how I prefer to remember him.
Right. And obviously, the Samoa Joe match, he would have the choose death shirt, the black jeans. But I think he came out to the song from Office Space, if I'm not mistaken. Feels good to be a gangster, or whatever it is. But what is not gangster is Nate Webb taking a hip toss on the red ring steps, which they don't look like much, but those motherfuckers were heavy, man. They were wooden steps covered in a red carpet, and we took those all over to shows until they finally broke down or whatever. So while it may not look like much, a hip toss on those steps were deadly. It seems like this tables match is just, you have the use of tables in the match. You don't have to hit you don't have to hit a move through one to go for a pin, or you don't have to hit a move through one to win the match. It's just like, oh yeah, there's tables in this match, because I think Necro tries to pin him after the hip toss on the steps, and when John Howard starts counting, I'm like, all right, okay, I guess that's false count anywhere. So now that
Fannin is so bugged out by the rules too.
Yeah. He's like, what
the hell is this shit?
And nobody knows the rules.
I have in my notes, as we do for most of these shows, this is like the epitome of an IWA match.
Oh, absolutely.
So great. And like, it's so entertaining, and the spots are nuts, and people are getting fucked up, and the rules make no sense.
Right.
Because, I mean, the finish is a belly to back through a chair.
Right.
It's like, what? It's a tables match. Even the finish is through an object. It's just not a table.
Nate Webb is able to hit a flipping Van Terminator, the Fang, he would later call it, to a giant ovation. And then after that, Necro, I mean, he kind of no-sells it, picks Nate up, and just awesome bombs him over the top rope.
Right on his head, too. Like, hits the back end of the table and just flops right on his head.
I mentioned this to you on last night. Nate Webb is going for a chair shot through a table on the floor, from the top to the floor. And you can see, 12-year-old Nick Maniwa, like, against the wall because it's cleared out over there. I can see more of the action. And then once I see Nate Webb is climbing up top, I dart to my music table chair to stand up on top. And at this point, Fannin even gives me a shout out on commentary, like, was that through a table, Nick Maniwa? So
I caught that too.
Yeah, I was like, just see my little fat ass running to see. Like, I gotta see this fucking table spot, brother.
I heard Fannin, shout you out on there, but I didn't see it until I went back and looked, and I was like, oh, there it goes. It's uncanny how much he looks like, how much 12-year-old Nick Maniwa looks like your kid. Like,
right, I know, man.
The same person.
I know. The other day,
and everything. Like, how cool is that?
The other day, Junior was saying something to me. I was like, bro, you are literally me. Down to the titties and the gut. You look just like me at that age.
I had one of those the other day, too. We were going for a walk, and I was wearing, like, black shorts and a black t-shirt. And my son comes down, black shorts, black t-shirt, same glasses. I'm like, you fucker, you are me.
Right, totally.
Going back to this match, the one thing that I did always think was cool, and you will have a better, take on this than I would. I always thought it was cool how Jim Fannin, as a 30-year-old man or whatever at the time, always referred to you as like his colleague. Right. It was never like, oh, this punk ass not nosed kid. It was always like, oh, Nick Maniwa, what do you think of this? Or like, it always felt like he had respect for you as a person and not just like some fucking kid.
Right. Yeah, definitely. At that point, me and Jim were friends and hanging around. He was like my big brother at that point. So, we were doing midnight bowling, and later on we mentioned, going to the Morris game, and we would go up to a Chicago show when we'd stay at his grandma's house, and we were still friends to this day. He was in my wedding. I talk to Jim Fannin probably every day. We send each other stupid memes. We send each other stupid Twitter things.
And Jim. That's cool, like, in perspective, right? Like, you're a kid at this point, but you're also with adults the entire time. There's no other 12-year-old kids hanging out at wrestling shows, right?
Right.
So not until later in your life and wrestling career, probably, I would imagine, did you actually have friends that were your age?
Yeah, I mean, not really. My neighborhood didn't really have a ton of friends. I had my cousin and my nephews and people like that, but I didn't have a ton of, kid friends at that time. I was on AOL Instant Messenger, like Bother and Chris Hero and Dysfunction and Josh Prohibition and people like that, so I was kind of just the single kid, because my nephew Joe would go to shows, Patty's son, but he had no interest in wrestling, so he would sell merch and be drawing stuff and not paying attention to the shows, and had no interest in pro wrestling. Still to this day has no interest in pro wrestling. So didn't have a lot. My And even if I did have friends, if I was gone 3 weekends out of the month, I can't really hang out with them, can't really go to birthday parties and stuff. So when I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I actually did have friends that we did do stuff together, and I stopped going to shows and, went to football games and went to dances and went to, parties at people's houses and stuff like that. And that's why, like, at TPI 05 and King of the Death 05, I'm not there because I'm just, like, hanging out at home in Louisville instead of, like, going to shows and missing school and yada, yada, yada.
I didn't mean to bury you and tell the world that you had no friends. It was more to highlight how cool I thought it was that, even as a 12-year-old kid, you were respected because you were, the kid in a room full of adults, or at least in age adults. And,
right.
Yeah, so good for you. And, yeah, never getting caught up in the shenanigans.
I think, I've been around wrestling my whole life, and I love wrestling. Obviously, we're talking about a 22-year-old show in, 2024. And, I got shows this weekend, and all I do is pro wrestling. Like, I think a lot of the guys like Chris Hero and Mark Wolf and, those guys could see that I really love this stuff, and I really wanted to learn, and I really wanted to know as much as possible. Oh, you've never seen Kawada before? Here, check out Kawada. Or you've never seen Johnny Saint? Here, check out Johnny Saint. Or, there would be times where I'd go and, hang out for a weekend at Chris Hero and Mark Wolf's, and we'd watch tapes, or we'd do this, or, what do you think about this? So it was really kind of like a education my whole life, being around wrestling and just being a sponge, essentially learning everything I could. And, Chris Hero does this move. Hey, why do you do this move? Oh, I learned it from this guy, and this guy does it, and it's a tribute to this guy. Oh shit, So I think. Go ahead.
The coolest part of that story is that maybe a little bit, but not really, had minimal to no interest in becoming a wrestler yourself or being involved in, the performance of it, and more as like supporting cast, a steward of, pro wrestling, someone who will get stuff over, someone who wants to know more about it. And it's a different take than you normally see of a kid who's interested in wrestling, because normally, someone in your position would be going to Chris Hero, like, how do I do this move? How do I do that move? How do I do this? Can I get in the ring? Can you show me this? But it wasn't that. It was more of like, teach me the science and the art of this stuff, because I don't necessarily want to be a wrestler. I just want to know more about it, and I love it, and I want to watch it, and I want to make it better, and I want to get the word out. Right. Everything that you've done so far with wrestling has been in support of making it better or supporting its existence. And I don't think there's a huge population of people that feel that way.
Yeah, like as a kid, like it was like, oh, I'm going to be a wrestler, I'm going to be a wrestler. And then as I got older, it's like, do I want to be slammed around? Do I want to be pile driven into the mat? Do I want to go through tables? And, it kind of pivoted until later on, in 2008, when there wasn't anyone sitting next to Jim Fannin, and I jumped on commentary, and then I was like, hey, maybe I can do this. And then, later on in 2013, I would start, doing every show for IWA Midsouth. But yeah, like I said, I've said multiple times to you, I've said it on Twitter and Facebook, like, I love this shit. I don't know what, like, pro wrestling has given me everything good in my life, so I don't know what I would do without it. I owe everything to pro wrestling, and it owes me nothing.
And, it's like you've talked about it before with Reed Bentley, it's maybe the opposite for him. I don't know that to be true, but I mean, you've said before, like, in jokingly, like, he could have done other things than wrestling and probably been a much more successful, at least in the traditional sense of what we think of success, superficially, not necessarily happiness.
Right, just in life, you mean?
Right, yeah. Like, there's other things that people like Reed Bentley could have done other than getting thrown through tables, glass, thumbtacks on a weekly basis that would have made their life maybe more fulfilling, not necessarily through passion project or, you know what I mean? Like, yep. in the sense that the world thinks of people as being successful.
Yep.
there are other easier, more, health, health encouraging options than pro wrestling. And I think you probably saw that early on. Like, yeah, I don't want to go through tables. It's not worth it. I'd rather just watch it and enjoy it.
Right.
I hope that I'm not misrepresenting what you've said before, but
No.
Just the fact that it's not an easy career path. It's not going to make you a ton of money. It's going to fuck your body up. There are definitely other ways to use your brain that are probably, more financially suitable than professional wrestling. But in a case like from what I understand of Reed, if you love it, you love it. Right. And if you love it, there's nothing that's going to fill that void for you but it. So by all means, as an able-bodied individual, young in your life, go live shit. Go do what you want to do.
Right. Absolutely. And, he could have went on and, every time that it pops up in Facebook memories, like, hey, I'm going to this show, the show that I first met Reed at, I always like share it and put like, hey man, sorry for ruining your life. Sorry for, encouraging you to be an independent wrestler instead of, going to college and becoming a lawyer or a doctor or, whatever he had his mind set on. When that wrestling bug bites you, there's no way to not be involved. You know what I mean? You have to some way, even if you're not going to shows, you're still reading about it, or even if you're not reading about it, you're still watching it, or, whatever. Like, my life is just, and I'm okay with that. All I've wanted to ever be in life is be involved in pro wrestling. And after that, before that, all I wanted to be was a dad. And, I'm a dad, and I get to be involved in pro wrestling, and my kids get to be involved in pro wrestling. My son right now, really enjoying it, really loving it, really, reacting to it. I sent you that clip of, us at Grindhouse where he's jumping up and down because his favorite guy is winning a belt, and he sobbed, happily afterwards because his guy won the belt. That really speaks to me. That, as a wrestling fan, I wanted to freaking cry when I saw him crying, but I can't because I'm doing commentary. But
that's what wrestling's all about.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I know we just went off on a tangent, and the IWA fans are gonna be like, "What the hell? You guys are crying? What?"
You articulated that a lot better than I did, so I again apologize if I misrepresented any of that. But it's one of those things, like, if you desire to be a wrestler, please go do it. At least try it out. If you don't like it, fuck it. But if that's something that you feel passionate about, and I think Bentley's a good example of that from what I know about him, is he had options, right? Smart guy, good looking kid. He decided he wanted to do this wrestling thing, and fuck it. He put his shit down and said, yep, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go all the way. And it may not, I may not make WrestleMania main event, but I'm going to make a go of it and have some fun, and not sit there as a 40-year-old man in his recliner saying, you know what, I wish I could have done that wrestling thing.
Right, yeah, you don't want to have the what ifs later in life. Try it now, or even if you you are the 40-year-old man, go to a wrestling school, take a bump, see if you got it still. Life's too short, man. Life is too short.
Exactly.
Next up, Cash Flow and Ian Rotten against Mean and Hard for the IWA Tag Team titles. There are no physical tag team titles at this point.
Nor is there an Offspring entrance song for Cash Flow, which I was pissed about.
Right, Cash Flow was using, I believe it's Bye Bye by the Psychopathic Ridas. Ian is using It's My Life by Bon Jovi for his entrance.
What a gem.
I guess he really liked that song, and he was like, you know what, I'm going to use it for entrance music. I always hated when he switched from Beautiful People, because it's like, the fans came from Beautiful People. They don't care about Bon Jovi or...
That's a terrible entrance song. It's a great song. Great song. But that is an awful entrance song.
Nadia Nice is his valet for the night to counteract Prazak, Downtown Dave Prazak, for Mean and Hard. If Ian and Cash don't win the titles, Cash will leave IWA, is the ongoing storyline. Fannin explains it extremely well on commentary. Basically, there's been situations where Cash has cost Ian and Hero the tag titles or cost them matches, and Ian feels like he can't trust Cash, and it's a very layered storyline for independent wrestling at the time.
And Jim did a good job of,
yeah,
I think, relaying that through the commentary without being like overly explanatory to where you would know what the result's going to be.
Yeah. Ian hits Mitch with 6 chair shots before he finally goes down. And you hear Fanon say, this is, reminded me of Olytic during one of Ian and Ox Harley against Mean and Hard during, Mean and Hard first being put together, easy for me to say, with Fanon as the manager. I think Mitch took like 4 chair shots where he wouldn't go down and then finally went down on the 5th. So that's what that reference is there. Cash wins the match with the oh shit leg drop to become the new tag team champions with Ian. They hug, and then Cash immediately turns on Ian.
Not even after the hug, during the hug.
During the hug, he belly-to-belly suplexes him. And Cash's thing is, you couldn't trust me, and since his IWA career is saved, now he can beat the shit out of Ian. Ian gets the sauce. You can see him a couple times gigging his head there.
Never.
Just right on camera. Doesn't give a shit.
No.
Mark Wolf hits the ring. They beat on him. They leave him bloody. A typical heavy heat IWA Mid-South angle here with a lot of blood. They finally get ran off by Corp and Hero and all them. Mitch and Roland jump on commentary and they're talking smack. I've heard this so many times from Ian. I've heard this and that. This is BS, yada, yada, yada. And then Ian personally guarantees to end Cashflow's wrestling career. Cashflow, still an active competitor. Ian Rotten is not.
We've seen the same, maybe not the same story, a very similar story play out on various IWA shows. Someone turns on Ian goes nuts on the forehead and bleeds all over the place, gets on the mic after and says he's going to kill them, ruin them,
right.
But it works every single time.
It really does.
It's a tried and true storyline. It's very IWA. Everybody feels super compassionate to Ian. It works every single time, and it will never probably get old. It may get old, but it doesn't get old to me. So, it was an interesting storyline. It was kind of like I suspect you're going to turn on me, so let's put something else at stake. Right. And then we get over that hurdle and that stipulation, and then I'm still going to fuck you over.
Yeah, I thought it was expertly done.
Yeah,
with the turn after, you're expecting Cash the whole time to, do something, and he doesn't even hint at it until that hug, and then you see his face turn, and then you see the turn, and I don't think this led to anything with Cash, Mitch, and Roland being put together, and I wish it would have, because while Roland wasn't an IWA trained from the start, he started at OVW and then came over to IWA. I think it would have been a great little angle there with, the day ones essentially, turning on Ian, and, Cash says, I'm your firstborn in wrestling, your first student, and, I'm tired of your shit or whatever. And then later on in IWA in 2013, it was Reed Bentley's led heel group against Ian Rotten's babyface group, and Reed Bentley told Ian, like, your firstborn will betray you, and the whole time people thought it was JC Rotten who had just turned back babyface, and it was actually Cash Flow. So they actually did, eventually come back to this later on in IWA lore, reference again that Cash Flow is the firstborn in terms of wrestling training with Ian Rotten. So not like we're planting any seeds in 2002 for 2013 or anything, but I thought it was cool that it came back around. At least the phrasing of the firstborn.
And it's a cool use of that. Like the stage was set in 2002. And, you know, if you're in 2013 doing your homework and know that or have seen that or, you know, are reviewing tape and, you know, that comes across and you're like, oh, I can use that in this angle. Like, that's super cool because it's not intentionally setting something up for the future, but it's taking advantage of an angle that was put on years and years ago and just making it relevant again, which I think is super cool in wrestling because it does happen. It doesn't happen often, but there are spots where like something will be done in the past, and then years later you're like, oh, remember that? And that wasn't the intention at the time, but it just makes it gives it more breadth of, you know, meaning.
Right. Yeah, I believe, you know, obviously Chikara is one of the best ones when it comes to, you know, a throwaway comment being the comment that led this one down a dark path or whatever the issue may be, you know, with Quack being a comic nerd and Easter eggs and stuff like that. Definitely a lot of that in Chikara past. Main event, 3-way for the IWA Mid-South World title. There is a title at this point. It is CM Punk, Chris Hero, and Colt Cabana. Like I said with Necro, this is another prime look era for all three of these competitors. The first thing I think of when I hear their names is this look. Cabana in that singlet, Punk in those shorts, Hero in that blue and blue or blue and white, you know, gear with the Superman shirt. A lot of fun 3-way spots in this match. A lot of stuff I couldn't remember seeing, and I don't think I've seen again since that match, if that makes any sense.
I agree. Yeah, that's the thing that stood out the most to me was that they incorporated all three wrestlers equally in almost every spot.
Yep.
Like no one was ignored in any of it. I think there was a period of time for, you know, maybe 30 seconds where Punk went out the ring and it was just Cabana and Hero in the ring. But every other spot in that entire match was a 3-person spot, which you never see in a 3-way, especially an indie 3-way. Like they'll throw someone to the floor, they'll do the one-on-one. They'll throw someone else to the floor, a guy will come back in, they'll do the one-on-one. And then you don't see the 3 people until the finish again. But right. I think this just shows you how smart these guys are. Like how much they get the business and how they look at a 3-way match differently than just a standard singles match. And like, what kind of cool stuff can we get in? Can we get, you know, a situation where I have this guy in a waist lock and on the other side he's locking up collar and elbow with another guy? You know, like how can we kind of put 2 pieces of a puzzle that don't go together?
Right, absolutely. And I think, like you said, it's unlike every 3-way in history, essentially, because they're always involved. They're always doing something. Cabana is the champion for this match, and he leaves the show with the championship.
It's another IWA finish, too. You know, it's apparently an elimination match.
Right.
But we don't know that until the last, you know, minute of the match where it's like, oh, Hero's out. Okay. And then Cabana rolls up Punk for the 3 count. He's the winner. It's cool. It wouldn't have changed anything for me, but
right.
It's rules, man.
With the introductions cut out, I don't know if they announce, you know, total elimination.
That's fair.
I did hear Fannin at one point, or maybe Prazak. No, is Prazak out there? No. Mentioned that it was elimination like once during the match, so okay. I did have a note of that. Nadia Nice is ringside with Hero. She gets involved. There's a wonky bow and arrow from Punk at one point. And then, like we said, Cabana wins the match. And then, with the heavy heat in the last match, I feel like Ian always wanted the world title to be last if possible. I feel like we could have switched that and had that tag be last. Yeah. Because after Cabana wins, it's just like, all right, guys, show's over. And then it just ends. There's nothing, you know what I mean?
The build, the emotional build wasn't there. Yeah. It was a great match, and it was a much better match than the tag team match was. But I think switching those two would have been the appropriate emotional roller coaster that you're looking for.
Right.
Dave Prazak dropped some vicious things on Nadia Nice.
Right.
I think commentary.
Yep.
Yeah, he was dedicated to that character, which again, in hindsight, when you know about what he is about and what his career with Shimmer is like, is wild to see someone that dedicated to the character
Right.
and couldn't have a more different opposite opinion in real life.
Right. Putting the man back in manager.
And like we've talked about it a little bit, at least I have before with Cabana, is his IWA career, like he had great matches, not the Hero Punk caliber of matches, but I think he saw it as an opportunity to try shit. And like earlier on in his career, like he was trying stuff, and not everything came across great. Some of it was a little bit clunky, some of it didn't flow terribly well, but he was always willing to try something different. And then, like, as his career progressed and he became the professional wrestler that he is, or became later, with, the European style and all that stuff, it all makes sense. So, like, his concept of trying different shit that no one else was doing and see what could click and how to kind of mesh these things together. So I always thought that was cool. And, you look at a guy that's built like him and you don't expect someone that's going to put on, non-traditional holds. He kind of looks like a powerhouse. So I always appreciated that about Cabana, and I think that really shined later in his career when maybe he wasn't the physical presence that he was as a kid.
Right, you can definitely see the European influence. Definitely see, what tapes he was watching at the time, seeing all of his moves in the three-way. Punk and Cabana were married to each other for many, many years, especially, 99 to around this time, and then even into 03 until they finally started tagging up everywhere instead of wrestling each other. I thought this was a fun show. It's kind of a nothing show. There's some big angles on it, some good matches, but it's kind of just a throwaway show in the grand scheme of things with IWA Mid-South lore and history. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was, the standard show for this era. It had, like you said, a little bit of everything and so many great names on it. We had the hardcore guys, we had the Punk Cabana heroes, we had, the guys that are a huge part of IWA lore, like Morton. It was like, again, I mean, we haven't had one yet that wasn't well rounded, but it's about as well rounded a show as you can get. There was no bad match. There were a few good to greats, like you would say.
Right.
So I mean, it was super entertaining. I thought it was, a great piece if you're looking for something from that 2002 era on what IWA is all about. That's what it's all about, man.
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned, maybe we'll get to the second part of the double shot in the near future. I forgot to do the follow-up for last show. The Drake song that we mentioned, I had heard it before. I didn't know what the title of the song was, but after listening back, I had heard it. Shout out to the Lauryn Hill sample that he used in that song. And
Amy Schumer still sucks. So
Amy, forever sucks. I think we do have something in mind for the June show. So if you want to send any suggestions, we did 02 this month, so let's try to do something far bit different. We do have something in mind, but I don't know if it's on IWTV, so we will take suggestions for June. So any IWA Mid-South show in June, there might, I think something just popped up in my head actually, so we'll have to see if that's on.
The other thing, like you mentioned about the IWTV stuff is, I guess we kind of want to know, is that a deal breaker for some of our listeners? Like, if it's not there, does that change your interest level in the particular episode of the podcast? I know there's a lot of folks that probably like to do, not a watch along, but maybe a watch later situation. But if that is not available publicly, is that a deal breaker? I think is, kind of something that we want to track.
Right. Yeah, definitely. If you're one of the people that watch the show back after listening to the podcast or watch during listening or whatever, please let us know. If it doesn't have any, you don't care at all about watching the show back, please let us know. Shout out to the people that always put over the show, Thunder Kitty and Ray Waddell and Nick again, and all these people from overseas that listen to every show when they're like, oh my God, I'm so happy you guys dropped this. Like, you don't know what those words mean to us. Like, we are so appreciative. We are so, Mike Ruff is not on social media, so anytime I get comments for the podcast, I'll send it to Mike and we'll just gush over, being loved on the internet. So, we appreciate the love, and hopefully, we can continue to build this.
We talked about it before. This is kind of your redemption story with the IWA years. And it's also, before we started this thing, we talked about, like, let's just get some of our shit out there. Like, let's just talk about stuff like we would through text message in a verbal conversation. And I think people would be into it. And I think, we're on our way to that. It's been fun. Like, a lot of the stuff that we talked about, off air, we've been able to bring into shows, which is cool to me. And like you said, like, hearing the feedback on the show has been great so far. And, we're interested in growing it. We're interested in continuing it and doing some different stuff and seeing what clicks with the listeners and taking some of that feedback into account and, putting out a product that not only are we proud of, that we've had fun making, but also is interesting to people listening. Like, it doesn't all have to be the headlocks and the wrist locks and, the play-by-play calls of a wrestling show. It's the stories behind it. It's the people behind it. It's our dumbass opinions of stuff like Amy Schumer.
Right.
It's the whole package, I think, that we present that we want fans and listeners to get into.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we went off on that tangent about my love of pro wrestling. We've gone off on tangents before. We just want to continue to build this, and, I'm working on that MidsouthMemories Google Drive to kind of preserve any of history and any, using Wayback Machine and using different websites to get all these old pictures off and onto the Google Drive. So if you have any photos you would like to donate or add to said Google Drive, please let me know. MidsouthMemories@gmail.com if they are digital. If they are physical copies, I will do all the work of scanning them in and giving you back your physical copies. I just recently attempted to add a photographer that used to do those indie shows who took amazing photos, so I'm hoping he will add me back and I can bug him about IWA Mid-South photos like I used to as a 13-year-old, 12-year-old boy with a free web space website. Shout out to Dan Seacat. So,
I do have one other comment on that
yes.
same front, Nick. On our intentions of the show, right? Part of it also is to give some credit and validation to some of the guys that had great careers in IWA and maybe didn't transcend the wrestling industry, but put in a lot of time, effort, and love into the craft. And they did that in IWA. Like guys like Mark Wolf, right? Guys like Jim Fannin poured out heart, soul, everything into it and didn't get the love back from wrestling that he probably put into it. It's to validate those guys. It's, for the Chris Heroes that busted their ass for their entire lives for wrestling and maybe didn't get the love that they should have gotten out of it. At least I feel, it's to validate some of those guys, even the younger guys, the younger generation, like you had mentioned, Tyler Matrix and those guys, the Reed Bentleys, the guys that, have put in so much good work throughout their careers and maybe didn't get the publicity and love for it. It's a shout out to those guys. And I mean, I feel like we can all see some of ourselves in some of those guys where, you dedicate your life to something and don't get the validation ever that you hoped that you would. So it's a shout out to those guys. It's, it's to bring back the memories, like Mid-South memories, right? The Todd Mortons, the Mark Wolfs, all those guys, the Shirley Does who have busted their asses for 30 years and not gotten much back. It's a lot of it is for some of those guys too, is to keep their work relevant and to relive some of what they did throughout their careers.
Right, absolutely. So I don't think we got If the Action Looks Like It's Coming Your Way on this show. I don't recall it if we did.
Nope.
Best theme of the show, where you can only hear a snippet of the theme. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe Teenage Dirtbag, maybe Colors by Ice-T for Mean and Hard. Definitely not Bon Jovi.
It's a great song. It's a terrible entrance song. It's a great song. Not many options here, and not many opportunities to enjoy it. I would not give it to Nate Webb's because we didn't get the full experience of the intro.
Okay.
I like Colors is great. It's always going to be. I guess that's the one.
Yeah. The match of the night or moment of the night for you?
Ooh. That's a tough one. I didn't even think about that. The Awesome Bomb from Necro was one of them.
Yeah.
Just the entire three-way stuff in that match. I think that probably deserves the shout out more than anything.
Yeah, I think so.
The masterpiece that was that three-way match, and like it's kind of a throwaway match. It fits into the large collection of Punk Hero Cabana matches and doesn't really stand out. But if you're looking for tape on how to put a three-way match together, go to that one.
Right. You can definitely tell those three are students of the game. They all had ideas. They put them all together. And most of them, damn near all of them, worked out. So shout out to all of them for that. Building database. This would be the Indianapolis Knights of Columbus Hall. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buildings for IWA Mid-South for the shows. I will have a character database for the next show, counting every single in-ring competitor on the show. I think wrestlers and managers only, I have 123 if I'm not mistaken. But I forgot to count referees, so I need to go back and count referees because I don't want to leave anybody out if they were in-ring performing for us. So that will be updated whenever the next show comes out. All right, with that said, we got nothing else for this month's Mid-South Memories. As always, you can follow me at Nick Maniwa. You can go to roughfigures.com and check out his portfolio, check out his eBay auctions, and you can even get a commission done by Mike Ruff.
We got new stuff dropping this week, too.
Ooh, new stuff dropping. I haven't even seen it yet. I've just seen a list of names, so...
It is weird, crazy, and all over the place, as is my life. So I think it's fitting. It'll catch a little bit of everybody's interest, maybe. It'll catch a little bit of no interest on some of them. Lance Cade. Anyways, that's about all I got. Nick, you got anything on the schedule coming up? I know you got a big show this weekend and a convention deal going on in conjunction with that.
Yes, so I have Paradigm Pro Wrestling tomorrow. This will not be out in time for either show, probably, but probably not. But Paradigm Pro Wrestling tomorrow, you can catch it later on Triller TV. And then Saturday, Ascending the Queendom from Hooligan Championship Wrestling. It is an all-female show that is in Evansville, Indiana, and then the afternoon, I will be at a wrestling convention in the same venue, trying to meet Dave Brown and, trying to meet some old Memphis wrestling legends. Next week, I have Unsanctioned Pro in Columbus, Ohio. Charlie Tiger versus Derek Dillinger for the Unsanctioned Pro heavyweight title, already signed for that show. We also have John Wayne Murdoch versus Casanova Valentine versus Tommy Vendetta for the UP World Hardcore title. We have Alex Colon versus Ace Perry in a Styles Clash. And then we have the tag team titles of the Awesome Odyssey defending their newly won titles against These Men Do Not Exist of Annika Murphy and Victor Analog. And then the Psychedelic Kings of Christian Robinson and Jeffrey John. Also appearing, Aaron Williams, Sam Beal, Rachel Armstrong, Gary J. The Swinger, Vic Vice, Tyler Vox, Zay Garcia, and so much more. That is at the Ace of Cups next Saturday, the 18th, in Columbus, Ohio. What else do I have? I have Grindhouse Pro Wrestling at the end of this month, 5/26, at the Jeffersonville Arena. And then I have Unsanctioned Pro 6/15 back at the Ace of Cups in Columbus. I have 6/29, the show with Shane Douglas, Sandman, Fonzie, and Francine, Every Child Wins, in Lafayette, Indiana. And then I already have a show signed for Generation Next Pro Wrestling in August of this year, August 23rd, another high school show. We did one last week with Ricky Morton and Chris Harris and Myron Reed and Kinsey Page, and that was a blast. All those shows are now going up on the High Spots Wrestling Network, highspots.tv. So definitely check those out when they become available. And I guess with that being said, that was this episode of Mid-South Memories. At Nick Maniwa on social media, roughfigures.com, and we will see you next month. That's all I gotta say. I'm out of here.